a man. Let me be a woman. Let me be a woman. Let me be
I returned to LA, went to see Abe Summer at his office, and requested that he set up a meeting for me with Jeff Wald, Helen Reddy's husband. I really thought I could do a good job of producing Helen, and Lord knows she needed a hit at the time. It had been about a year since she'd been on the charts. So Abe agreed and set up my meeting with Jeff Wald. In preparation, I went to Rare Records and asked to borrow album covers from Helen's chief competitors at the time, Olivia Newton-John, Diana Ross, Carly Simon. Each one of the competitors' album covers were soft and warm and inviting, and Helen looked like a schoolmarm on her album covers. So I took those, went to all my song plugger friends, got some great songs, particularly from Roger Gordon at Screen Gems Columbia, and went to my meeting with Jeff Wald. When I laid the album covers in a circle around Helen's current album cover, Jeff said, "Okay, a picture's worth 1,000 words, you don't have to say anything else. Let me call my wife, because now you got past me, now you're going to have to get past her." So I went to their home in Brentwood, sat with Helen in her study, and played her the tunes I had found, which she loved. They were a combination of really nice ballads, kind of in the tradition of what she was known for, and then some just, kind of mild dance numbers. Disco was quite popular at the time. I knew I didn't want to take Helen Reddy, quote, disco, unquote, but I felt I could lean her a bit that way. So we decided it was a deal. Abe Summer, now this is where it gets interesting, Abe Summer was Helen Reddy and Jeff Wald's attorney, so he's my attorney as well. He did not issue me a conflict of interest agreement to sign, but I knew that there was some jeopardy in having the same man represent all of us. Anyway, Abe had always been good to me in the past, so I figured that would not change. Boy, how wrong I was. I booked 2 different sessions at RCA's Music Center of the World, one for the ballads and another one about a week later for the dance tempo cuts. Playing on the ballad cuts was Ed Green, my first call drummer for Pop Stuff 4 years, exceptional drummer, and my best friend Darnielle Pershing was the arranger for the date. Helen showed up, had gotten lost. I had to meet her out front and walk her into Studio A. She kind of tripped on the door jamb on the way into the studio, but all was well, and the date turned out just delightfully. I then was able to convince Larry Carlton, the guitarist who played the remarkable solo on Rock the Boat, to go against his current rule at the time, which was he wasn't accepting studio dates, by offering him to play on Helen's session if he could record it at his own home studio. So he did, and he just did a wonderful job. We added black background singers, and then it was time for Helen to sing. Well, that wasn't going real well, and I got really an officious, angry call from Jeff Wald saying, "What have you done to my wife? She sounds like Percy Faith." Well, actually, the first thing that occurred to me was why it wasn't Helen calling me, but in Hollywood sometimes you have the manager call to intervene for you. But goodness, I was working with her every day. She certainly could have talked to me directly. Anyway, I said, "Jeff, does Helen like the songs we chose?" "Oh, she loves the songs." "How about the rhythm tracks? Does she like the rhythm tracks?" "She loves the rhythm tracks." "How about the black background singers?" "Loves the background singers." "Ah, it's Darnielle's orchestrations." "She hates the orchestrations." "Okay, well, Jeff, did it occur to you, we'll just replace the orchestrations. I'll get somebody else to do them. Somebody probably like Gene Page." "Well, I don't know. I think I should fire you." And I said, "Well, you have a choice on that, Jeff, because on Monday we have the second date for the dance tempo tunes, and it's at my studio at RCA with my engineer, with my musicians that I booked for it, and you can either fire me and get somebody to come in cold into what is essentially my session, or let me produce the rhythm date, and then you can fire me." He said, "You got a deal." So when we went in and we recorded the dance-leaning stuff, James Gadsden was the drummer, and he just was terrific. Jeff Wald called after the date and said, fantastic session, John. And I said, you mean I'm not fired? And he said, no, you're not fired. Go ahead with it. But in essence, what happened is Helen and I could not communicate in the studio. We were fine around the fireplace in her study or around a piano, but I couldn't get her to relax in the studio, and I feel she was uncomfortable with me, and I didn't know how to change that dynamic. In the past, I've done everything to dim the lighting in the studio, bring in, say, table lamps from a living room, put people on speakers instead of headphones for a while, just as if they were singing to a radio. Sometimes I would give them a Valium just to calm them down. All kind of techniques I could use in order to get a singer to relax. In this case, I couldn't. Some of my singers over the years, when the red light of the recording machines came on, they were far superior vocalists to the vocalists they were before the red light came on. They just knew their moments of truth, and they went for it. 2 or 3 others, Helen was one of those 2 or 3, seemed to freeze when the recording light came on. And I take responsibility for that because I just couldn't get her to relax. My fault. So Jeff, Helen, and I decided to go our separate ways. And I still hadn't been paid. I hadn't been paid my advance check that was due before I entered the studio. And here we were 3-4 months later, and I had done, 6 or 8 tracks on Helen. And I hadn't been paid during this time, and now I haven't been paid after it. So I made repeated calls to Abe Summer and could not get satisfaction. I couldn't get paid. So in a tequila-driven tiff on the phone, I said, from now on you'll be dealing with Joe Scandori. Well, that really pissed everybody off over at Mitchell Silverberg and Knupp. I left Mitchell Silverberg and Knupp and Abe Summer, and I went to Mason and Sloan, where they became my attorneys. They were probably number 2 in town with the Bee Gees and Olivia Newton-John. And they said, we'll get your money for Helen Reddy from them. Well, nobody at Mitchell Silverberg and Knupp would pick up the phone, and they couldn't get me my money. So what happened is, one day, in total exasperation, I went to see Joe Scandori, Don Rickles' manager. And I said, Joe, I can't get my money from Abe Summer and Jeff Wald. Can you help? And he said, John, watch this. So he picked up his phone, he called Jeff, and he said, Jeff, hi, Joe Scandori here. How's Helen? How's Governor Brown? How are the kids? By the way, I have maybe 3 close friends in the world, and one of them is John Florez. I think you owe him some money, is that right? Well, how much do you think you owe him? Okay. Well, when can I have that check delivered to my, Joe Scandori's, house? Perfect, Jeff. Thanks a lot. Take care. All of a sudden, the attorneys are talking to each other, and I've got my deal. The problem is that Joe Scandori was known to some people in town as having mafia contacts. So Abe Summer put out the word that John Florez goes through the mafia to get paid. I didn't go through the mafia. I went through Joe Scandori, who was like a father and a mentor to me, and who had never done remotely anything illegal, nor asked me to do anything remotely illegal. In fact, some of the pillars of the business had asked me to do things that were illegal, and to me, they were more trouble than Joe Scandori ever was. Anyway, I got paid for Helen Reddy, which was great, and then the single came out, and the album came out. My name was misspelled on the album, the royalties were all goofed up. It was just a mess. I remember walking down the street one day while this was going on and telling the story to Don Berkheimer, my mentor at RCA, and Don said, John, everyone in Hollywood knows that's the most difficult account in town. You accepted it, you knew what you could be getting into, and so I don't want to hear about it. And he was right. It taught me a lesson to only work with nice people. From that point on, that's what I did. The next artist I did was Freda Payne for Capitol. Joe Scandori's friend, Stan Hanman, who was a Beverly Hills attorney, was managing Freda at the time. And Freda and I met, got along just great, sat down, picked out some songs, and we were ready to go. And she was just like me. Get in the studio, get out of the studio. Efficient, fast, fun. A pro. Freda Payne is a pro. There was a guy in town called Pete Robinson who had arranged Reunited for Peaches and Herb, which had been a big hit. And he had been recommended to me, so he arranged the first session for us. And it turns out, as I left for Phoenix the first weekend, came back, and Pete Robinson had run up an enormous bill in the studio on this rhythm track, something neither Freda nor I could stand for. We were trying to stay within budget. At the time, Dr. Cecil Hale, who was head of rhythm and blues for Capitol, came into the rhythm date that Pete had arranged and started making suggestions. I pulled him aside, took him outside of the control room, and said, "Cecil, I'll make you a deal. I'll handle the live session so we stay on budget. You stay out of that. But you love to mix, so you can mix down the entire album and I'll stay out of that." He said, "Deal." So, great. However, with Pete Robinson running up the bill so much on the first session, I was worried. I went to Freda, and Freda said, "Fire him, I've got my guy." And I said, "Who's your guy?" And she said, "Well, he's a white guy, Bruce Miller, but he's really good, and he's just like us. He's really fast and professional." And boy, was he ever. He created the most outstanding arrangements since Ray Cork's Grazing in the Grass album. I was thrilled. Freda was thrilled. I'll do a little aside. Freda thought we voiced the songs on the album a key too high for her. It wasn't in, quote, her pocket, unquote. She was right. In listening to that since, I'm so sorry I didn't listen to her at the time. Often what we did when working with singers was to see what their higher limit was to be as powerful as they could be. In Freda's case, that was an absolute no-no. You went into this lower, mellower pocket and you really had the sound that made Freda famous with Band of Gold. I blew it on that one. So when it was time to mix the album, Dr. Cecil Hale at Capitol took the tapes, went in, mixed them all. I was in Arizona on vacation while he did that. I promised to stay away, and I did. And when I came back, he called me from Philadelphia and he said, "Go into my office in the Capitol Tower and listen to the mixes. Tell me what you think." Well, I went to his office that day and listened to the mixes, and I was appalled. He had used scratch vocals. Those are vocal tracks that the singer uses to warm up before they do the master vocals. All the master vocals were marked with stars on them saying master vocals. Well, Cecil didn't really honor that. He just chose the ones that he liked and went with them. He was head of the division. That was his prerogative. Secondly, the strings sound like they had blankets thrown over them. And then some weird little, supposedly hip at the time, synthetic drum fills were added. The entire project was butchered, and I called Cecil and I said, "Cecil, we need to remix." And he said, "John, it's already gone to the plant, the pressing plant, for it to be pressed to vinyl." Oh my. I said, "Can I get a copy of it?" And he said, "Yeah, no problem," and he got me one. So I went home, called Freda, and I said, "Freda, what do you think?" And Freda said, "I love it, John. You guys did such a great job. You and Cecil did such a great job." And so I kept it zipped. I didn't say a word. But Bruce Miller came over one Sunday. I put on the copy of the acetate, and he said, "John, let's get drunk. It's unlistenable." And he was right. To this very day, I can't listen to the album because it's mixed so poorly, and some of Freda's greatest vocals, they were on the tape sitting back in the vault. Many years later, I sent Freda a cassette of the mixes that I made the night before I turned the tapes over to Cecil Hale. She was flabbergasted. She had no idea how great she really was. Cecil had just used some of the wrong tracks. Oh well, so that album didn't chart very well. Helen Reddy's hadn't charted very well, and now I'm in deep trouble because Abe Summers spreading the word that I'm dealing with the mafia, so I'm not getting a lot of work out of that one. And so in desperation, I called Lynda Carter, who had been a friend from my Arizona school days, and who had for a while lived with Carol and me in our home in Tarzana in the guest room, while she was working her way as an aspiring actress and singer. So I called Lynda Carter. Lynda invited me up to her house. She was married to her manager, Ron Samuels, at the time. And Lynda said, "Okay, John, let's do my next album together. Let's start rehearsal. I've got Kenny Rogers lined up to do a duet. I've got some other things in mind, so get me some songs and I'll see you for a rehearsal, okay?" Even though Lynda Carter wasn't viewed as a major record artist, she was very popular on television at the time, both in her series and in her specials. so that it would at least create some momentum for me, or at least try to create some momentum for me after such a pitiful year with Helen Reddy and Freda Payne. The next morning, her husband, Ron Samuels, called and said, John. I said, "Hi, Ron, how are you?" And he said, "Guess who our attorney is?" And I said, "Well, Ron, who's your attorney?" "Abe Summer, Helen Reddy's attorney, John." And he said, "If we use you, he's not going to get us a record deal. If we don't use you, he is going to get us a record deal. So we can't use you." I frankly thought maybe Lynda should be calling and telling me this, but here we go again, just like with Helen and Jeff, the husband calls. Okay, well that was really disappointing because Lynda and I worked well together and I really liked her. At the same time, I was producing demos on 2 or 3 artists that I liked and shopping them at labels, but I wasn't getting any sales, and I certainly wasn't what was considered hot in the business anymore. Tom Draper over at Warner Brothers said that Oscar Fields really loved Carl Graves. Now, if you remember during our previous chapter with Carl Graves, Oscar Fields was the head of promotion at A&M where Carl recorded. Oscar offered to buy a track called Walk Softly, which is a Van McCoy song, and sign Carl to Elektra, and we would have a recording deal there. Well, thank goodness, because there was nothing else going on. So the attorneys did their work, we all signed contracts, we did whatever, and Elektra Records went to pick up Carl Graves' master from A&M, and A&M would not release the master, disavowed the contract because guess who the attorney was at A&M, one of the founding partners? Abe Summer, Helen Reddy's attorney. So now Abe had blocked me on almost anything I had tried to do all year. I had no hits. My divorce had been a year or so prior to that, and the woman I'd been seeing, she and I weren't getting along hardly at all, and I felt she was treating me poorly at the time. So one night in December of 1979, I drank 12 hours worth of tequila, downed 2 bottles of Valium, wrote a suicide note, and signed it. I didn't take responsibility for my actions at the time, and I certainly do now. So my friends babysat me at my therapist's request. People were doing rounds, staying with me so I wouldn't do it again, which I wouldn't have. And then I went back to Cal State Northridge at the beginning of 1980. Took a couple of classes, started to try to put my life back together. Decided maybe I'd go home to Phoenix and see what I could do again. That's always where I seemed to go, which was back to my roots, back to Arizona. So that's where I went. So in the next chapter, we'll talk about my remarrying, coming back to LA, becoming president of a small label, and that being pretty much the end of my career, with the exception of the very last chapter. Thanks for listening.